Welcome back to Draw-Thru. It's time for Season 2. Last season we were talking about the classic era of Sonic games, as well as the Sonic OVA. But this season I thought I'd switch it up a little bit to talk about Transformers. Specifically, the oddball Transformers that actually have something to talk about. The recent years of Hasbro's Transformers line has been fantastic. They've had amazing on-screen accuracy, G1 accuracy, whatever you want to say. The posability is great, the functionality is great, it's got fun gimmicks. I mean, the War for Cybertron Soundwave turns into a tape deck like it did in the 80s, with knees and ankle pivots and everything. We are spoiled rotten with these things. So I don't feel like I have a lot to say about the modern releases because, I mean, they just look like their G1 counterparts. Optimus Prime is a great design. We all know this. Megatron, Soundwave, it's all great. So what do I talk about instead? I want to talk about Transformers. What do? Well, I picked guys like this. Megatron from 2005's Transformers Cybertron.
Our worlds are in danger.
Leader class. And yes, let's just get this out of the way. This is how big you should expect a leader to be from this time. And I get it. This is the new size of leaders. They're not big, they're small in comparison. I mean, this is a masterpiece scaled Springer, and he's still smaller than a leader class from 2005. I get the gripe about the scale. However, I do prefer my collections to stay reasonably in scale with each other. It's nice. If you were to look on the Cybertron show, this Megatron is much too big to be scale accurate within the show. And I know it's personal preference. What I'm trying to say is I get the gripe, but I do prefer the current leader size just on scalability for display. That's just me, though. So right off the bat, you were saying to yourself, this does not look like Megatron. We know what Megatron looks like. He's a gun, he's a tank, he's not the Batmobile. That's very low-hanging fruit, I know. Most people call this the Batmobile Megatron for obvious reasons. I mean, the spikes, the sharp angles, the rocket boosters, it all screams overly designed Batmobile from 1989 or 1991 or any of the other Tim Burton, Schumacher era Batmobiles. It's a fair comparison to make. It looks like a Batmobile. These right here, little front sections, look like Batman's gauntlet. It's obvious to see where the comparison comes from. So from a character design standpoint, what is this design actually telling us? Well, obviously, it's covered in sharp edges. So it's telling us it's dangerous, it's aggressive. You could also say it's animalistic. I'm sure they took cues, design-wise, from the horror aspects of bats. Bats are used very commonly in horror. I mean, Halloween is covered in bats. So from a vehicle perspective, let's kind of take a look here. It's got these great, big, powerful rear wheels, these little wing spoiler sections here on the back. It's got a lot of little panels and little flaps to make it feel like it goes wicked fast. This thing may be large, bulky, and menacing, but it also packs some speed. At least that's what the design is telling you. It's got this small little cockpit up front that really gives a scale of how small humans have to be next to this thing. This is a beast. It's an otherworldly vehicle that looks like it could just destroy anything on the roads today. I am unfortunately missing the two fins at the top here, but you get the picture. Oh, as well as the missiles too. This thing, of course, is deadly, so it packs some missiles. So the show that this guy comes from, Transformers Cybertron.
Our worlds are in danger.
Was a third of a trilogy. Armada, Energon, Cybertron. Each show had a toy line with a gimmick. So in the first show, it was all about minicons. Minicons would unlock special powers. In the next show, it was about Energon weapons. There wasn't really an unlocking feature, but you could also combine two together to make bigger bots. It was a whole thing. In Transformers Cybertron,
our world,
it was the Cyber Planet keys, very similar to Armada and its minicons. Each toy would come with a port. You would plug in a Cyber Planet key into that port, and whatcha! Excitement ensues. In vehicle mode, for Megatron, that means he has rocket boosters that come out. I believe once upon a time this guy had lights and sounds, but age has unfortunately not been too kind to him. So boosh! Rocket booster turbine jet things come out of his back, just to make him even faster. So Megatron is also a triple changer, kind of. So essentially, all you have to do to access Megatron's triple changer mode is take his little front sections, tab them into his big back wheels. There we go. Right there. Wonderful. Look how involved that transformation was. Wow, so difficult. I can't believe I made it this far without instructions. This is Megatron's jet mode, and I mean, kids have imaginations, right? It's weird. I don't have anything great to say about it other than it technically exists, it is present, and that goes a long way for me. It does have these little tiny wheels at the bottom, which is nice because it means you can still kind of roll it, even though this does lock in these wheels. I think this is more or less just to help with the regular car mode, unless I'm doing something and not supposed to be locking into there, but I'm pretty sure that's right. Yeah, you can tell I'm an expert. The colors in this one are very indicative of the awkward transition that was the 2000s. In the 80s, we had a lot of bright primary colors. Then late 80s and early 90s, we started getting a lot of fuchsias, teals, and off colors, like the secondary colors, but still bright and punchy. The 90s ended with grunge, and the early 2000s had a lot of... didn't really know what it wanted to do, because the 90s were still fun, and still around, and punching, and they still liked all the bright colors, but there was a shift to a more serious tone, hence a lot of gray. I don't really know if they knew what they wanted with the colors here, because you have a lot of bright, punchy colors with like a purple, classic evil purple, orange, purple Decepticon logo, obviously. This teal going on here, but then there's just these giant swaths of gray. And if you were to look at years before, this is what the 90s gave us. This is G2 Megatron. Well, technically it's a modern Megatron repainted into G2 colors with a little third-party edition here. But this is what the 90s gave us. Like, they committed. This was, I mean, there's gray in here. And the rest is screaming at you, look at me! But this one, it suggests that you look at him. Like, the shape language says, you better look at me or else you're gonna get sliced in half by one of my many sharp edges. But the color scheme doesn't quite scream as much as G2 did, or the 90s in general did. I mean, this is only 2 years before the Bayverse started, where everything was gray. It's kind of in this awkward middle stage of not really sure where it wants to put all of its chips. And it creates this ambiguous color scheme that I love because it's just so bizarre and you don't see stuff like this. So I think it's neat and really one of a kind. Let's do some size comparisons. While we're here, why not? This is Megatron next to Safeguard, Vector Prime's own Minicon, because Minicons were still a thing in Cybertron, even though they didn't unlock any powers, oddly enough. The ever-present fangirl Thunderblast, this is a deluxe class. Voyager class Vector Prime, getting kind of close as far as size is concerned. Another leader class, Optimus Prime. Supreme class, which is now almost the size of a Titan class. Starscream. This is the giant-sized Starscream we got in Transformers Cybertron. Let's get him into robot mode. And there he is. Cybertron Megatron in all of his non-G1 glory. I do love paying homage to original designs, but I'm not against going just completely in a different direction. This is the status quo. This is what kids got back in 1984. Obviously not this one, this is a third-party Legends figure, but that's what Megatron used to look like. That's what kids saw in their Saturday morning cartoons. That don't look anything like him. That looks completely different. And you know what? It's kind of fun. Like, he doesn't even have a fusion cannon. He is so different. And I don't mind massive departures. I think it's safer to go completely away from the source material. If you're gonna diverge, just go completely ham and go somewhere completely different. Make your own Megatron. A lot of his design cues just carry over directly. Obviously, because he is a Transformer, he's gonna keep a lot of the same parts, but particularly these older ones, they don't have a lot of moving parts, so it is just a lot of switching things around, and there's not a lot of hiding other parts or things tucking away into folds or flaps or panels. It's just the same parts, just kind of slightly moved around and a head popped up. So he keeps a lot of his same design elements here. But with the addition of the head, we see that he adds these great horns, these ferocious looking horns to the top of his head that, again, carry the whole spiked, dangerous to touch motif, although thankfully, these are all rubbery tips because they don't want kids to hurt themselves on these things. So everything that ends in a point is rubber. And he's the only Megatron I know to have his own cape built in. I mean, Megatron is a maniacal supervillain. He needs a cape. He is evil, and he will let you know he's evil. As far as articulation's concerned, his head's extremely limited, as he can't turn his head more than that because of his shoulder joints. The joints that have his front flap moved down for the chest block his movement here quite a bit. Just general 360 movement. He's got an elbow, little hand here, no fingers. Your general leader class hip movement. He does technically have an ankle pivot, which is more than a lot of figures from this age boast. So there's that. He is a little hard to stand up because of that cape and because he has this just giant plastic section here, and that tends to prevent a lot of movement and a lot of posing. He works great as something you just put on a shelf and then just don't move that much. Hopefully you don't live in a place with a lot of earthquakes because you'll probably fall off. As far as features are concerned, he does have more Cyberplanet key gimmicks. On his cape, he has, again, 2 slots for Cyberplanet keys. The first one that I'm going to open up here, it's just this little, his wheel turns into a Gatling gun and has a little crank on it that you can, spin it, which is fun. The second one releases a vaguely weapon stabby claw thing. It'll plug in here in a second. On his side here, and you can move it up and down, and it does that. Sure, why not? And then over here, you have, of course, his gun. And there you go. Nice fun features. Something you can play around with. Something to justify the fact that he has a Cyberplanet key. But that's not all the upgrades available to this Megatron. See, in this era of Transformers, combining with other Transformers was a big deal. It's always happening. Optimus was always combining with other people to become superpowered. And this Megatron, he got his own little combiner. This is Nemesis Breaker, the evil version of Leo Breaker that combined with Optimus Prime to create Savage Claw mode. Nemesis Breaker here combines with Megatron to make Dark Claw mode. But before I talk about Dark Claw mode, I do kind of want to mention something that I thought was really cool. And it's incredibly obvious now to me after the fact. Let me take you through it. I felt a little dumb when I discovered this, but in my defense, I watched Cybertron well before I knew who Nemesis Prime was. So years later when I'm revisiting it, I realized that Nemesis Breaker shares the exact same color palette as Nemesis Prime, the evil doppelganger of Optimus Prime. Exhibit A, Nemesis Prime. They both share the red, they both share the silver, both share the black, they both share the teal. I thought it was a nice little nod because at this time, Nemesis Prime wasn't really a huge character. How we saw him first was more or less Scourge from 2001 Robots in Disguise, where he was a completely different character who scanned Optimus at the same time he was scanning his alt mode, thus creating an Optimus-looking figure that turned into a slightly different vehicle. So pulling from Scourge/Nemesis Prime at that point was a little less obvious for those who didn't know what Robots in Disguise was until 2015-ish. So how do you do the thing? How does this work? How does this do this? Well, it's kind of shoehorned, I'll be honest. It's not the best combined mode. You take your Nemesis Breaker, or your Leo Breaker, or your Lio Convoy, or any of the other versions of this mold that came out around this time, and you transform him into ARM mode. You simply plug it into the little square that was revealed on the outside of the arm. There is no posability in this mode, other than just straight up and down, even if you're lucky, as evidence. If you have some kind of stand to hold it up there, that would work. But yeah, this is Dark Claw mode. He would clash in great mighty battles with Optimus Prime in his Savage Claw mode or Sonic Wing mode. There's something childishly amazing about this, that you could just slap on a lion to the bad guy's arm, and now he has this giant claw to attack, and you can attach a Cyber Planet key into Nemesis Breaker's claws. Flick that out, and look how impressive. He's got little dinky claws now. That's his super move, is to extend his claw by 1/4 of an inch. So yeah, this is Cybertron Megatron in his glorious dark claw mode. Let's get him back to his regular mode, and we'll finish up with some closing thoughts. Now, real quick size comparison before we move on. Minicon Safeguard, everybody's favorite shell former, Deluxe class Thunderblast, Voyager class Vector Prime, who also comes with his own cape, Supreme class King Starscream. There we go. So yeah, it's a good size. I mean, these are all just hefty guys. So currently the line we're in is Transformers Legacy, which is updated versions of more G1, but also G2, Transformers Prime, more G1, and Cybertron. They just released pre-orders for Cybertron Metroplex. But before that, we had Transformers Siege, back in 2019, releasing a modern take of the Transformers Cybertron Optimus Prime. Now, I think it was kind of them testing the waters to see if people would buy this. We did, so they said, okay, we'll make more. I really hope for a modern interpretation of this Megatron done to look like this, just because he has a crazy design that's never been seen before and really hasn't been seen since. No third parties have really given their hand at giving this guy an upgrade. I would love to see a modern take of him because he's such a unique character. And of course, I do have a bit of a bias. Transformers Cybertron
Our world
was the first show that I actually watched on the air of Transformers. But biases aside, do I think that this is recommendation worthy? Let's ask his voice actor, David Kaye himself.
Yes.
I couldn't agree with that. Before we close out, I do want to make special mention to one of my favorite aspects about Transformers Cybertron, the line itself. Legends scale. These little buggers are one of my favorite things because they are incredibly faithful downsizings of these figures. They managed to capture the essence, the very essence of the larger toy themselves without taking up a lot of square footage. The transformations are incredibly simple, but yet remarkably similar to the big ones themselves, which just kind of goes to show that we've come a long way in complexity. While this one is much, much smaller, the idea still carries across, and the design elements still shine through, which just kind of goes to show that this is a strong design that can work large scale or small scale. So these figures are Legends class, and currently we have what's called Core class. They're a little taller and have a lot more articulation, and I'm excited to see that they're doing really well. People seem to love them. I love them. They're great. It's great to have mini versions of the big characters, because sometimes we don't have this much space all the time, so it's good to have good little versions like these two. So that's Megatron 2005. I've been painting him on the other side of the screen this whole time. A lot of fun to do a paint of a robot. It's quite different from what I'm used to. I'm used to doing, Sonic and human anatomy and stuff like that, very organic shapes. So doing something this far out of field for me has been a fun experience. And I think it turned out pretty well so far for the first one. I'm excited to see where it takes me. A big reason why I'm doing this is because I do want to get better at robot designs, and I figure, what's a better way? It's like studying from the masters. So I hope you enjoyed the first episode of Season 2. I did struggle on just how to do a Transformers review, because frankly, I got people like Thew Adams, Jobby the Hong, That Toy Guy, all these great Transformers content creators out there, and I'm like, what do I have to say? But I figure I can bring my graphic design background and art background into this and talk about shape language and color theory and all that pretentious stuff. And throw some fan art on the side. Why not? So, this is what you should expect, probably, for the rest of Season 2. I hope you enjoyed it. But until then, see you next time.